I was halfway through my coffee when my brother's voice sliced through the buzz of the conference lobby. "Relax," he told the circle of people around him, loud enough for half the room to hear. "She's just admin. Fancy badge? Same old desk job." A few of them chuckled. I felt every laugh land on my skin like a slap. "My name is Kira Anderson, and for as long as I can remember, that's all I've ever been to my family. The organized one. The girl who answers emails, books flights, fixes everyone's mess quietly in the background." Today, though, I'm not just someone's little sister hanging on the edge of a conversation. I'm standing in the middle of a leadership summit my team helped build from the ground up, and my just admin brother has no idea what room he's really standing in. He's gesturing toward me now, still performing. "She loves this stuff. Schedules, color coding, spreadsheets. I mean, hey, somebody's got to print the name tags, right?" The group laughs again. My chest tightens, but I don't look away. Not this time. Next to him, his wife tilts her head, studying me with a curiosity I've never seen from anyone in my family. Her eyes flick from my badge to the logo on the massive banner behind me, then back to my face. "So, Kira," she asks, smiling politely, "what is it exactly that you do there?" The entire circle goes quiet, waiting for me to mumble something small, something that fits the story my brother has told about me for years. But that's not the story anymore. I take a breath, feel years of swallowed words rise to the surface, and let my answer sharpen down to a single word that will change everything. Before I tell you what I said, and what happened after the silence hit that room like a brick, tell me in the comments, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I want to see just how far this little family secret is about to travel. People think the worst wounds come from strangers. They don't. They come from the people who know exactly where to aim. Growing up, my brother was the sun our family orbited around. His name is David, 2 years older than me, and from the moment he made his first school science project, everyone decided he was going places. "David's the brains," our dad used to say at every barbecue, clapping him on the shoulder. "Kira's the helper. She keeps everything neat. Every great man needs a good assistant," my aunt once joked, ruffling my hair like I was a pet. They all laughed. I forced a smile and collected the paper plates. It started small. When we were kids, I color-coded his school binders, typed up his essays when his handwriting was too messy, ran back to school when he forgot his homework. If I asked for help with my own projects, he'd shrug. "Relax, Kira. You're good with organizing. I'm good with doing." By the time we were in college, the script was set. David studied engineering. I took a job as a part-time receptionist in an office and went to night classes because no one in our family thought it was worth paying for my degree. "You don't need a fancy diploma," Mom said. "You're practical. You'll always find admin work. People like you are everywhere." She meant it as comfort. It felt like a sentence. I still remember the first time David called me just admin to my face. He'd invited some friends over for dinner during spring break. They were all talking about internships, offers at big companies. "What about you, Kira?" one of them asked. "Where do you work?" I told them about the office where I handled everything from scheduling clients to tracking expenses. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the place from collapsing. David snorted. "She's just admin," he said without looking at me. "She keeps the printer from crying." The table erupted in laughter. My parents didn't say a word. I laughed too, because what else could I do? That phrase followed me for years, like gum stuck to the bottom of my shoe. At family gatherings, at Christmas, at weddings. Anytime someone asked about my job, David would jump in first. "She's basically our in-house secretary," he'd say. "If you need your calendar fixed, Kira's your girl." What he never noticed was that admin work taught me everything he refused to see. How power really moves inside a company. Who makes decisions? Who actually keeps things running? Who knows the numbers, the contracts, the weak spots? Admin sits quietly in rooms other people are desperate to enter. And I was taking notes. I got promoted more than once. Administrative assistant became administrative coordinator, then operations administrator, then administrative operations manager. Each title came with more responsibility, more visibility. But at home, I was still just the girl they asked to send out the group email for Thanksgiving. I could have corrected them. I could have pulled out my performance bonuses, the internal awards, the glowing reviews from executives whose careers I'd quietly kept from derailing. Instead, I swallowed it all. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. It was just family. It didn't matter what they thought, except it did. Because the more my career grew, the more David's jokes stung, not just as offhand comments, but as constant reminders that in his eyes, I would always be beneath him. Less than support, not substance. And when the company I worked for restructured and I was invited into a new department, one that combined my obsession with detail and my eye for patterns, I didn't tell my family much about it. Same job, different floor, I said when Mom asked. In reality, it was the first step toward the one word that would eventually make my brother's world stop. The morning of the summit, I arrived at the convention center before sunrise. The building was still half asleep. Cleaning staff rolling carts down the hallway, technicians checking cables on the main stage, the smell of burnt coffee already drifting out of the catering area. I swiped my badge, the security guard nodding as the scanner flashed green. "Morning, Ms. Anderson," he greeted me. "Big day." "Big day," I agreed. I wasn't there as someone's plus one. I wasn't there as a random attendee hoping to network my way up the ladder. I was there because my department had spent 6 months planning this summit with the executive team, designing the agenda, vetting the speakers, and, most importantly, evaluating which companies we wanted deeper relationships with. On paper, my title was long and forgettable: Administrative Operations and Acquisitions Coordinator. In practice, it meant something simple. I was one of the people who decided which partnerships were worth our time and which ones weren't. I'd started in that department doing what I always did: building systems. I tracked due diligence documents, organized meetings between legal and finance, created summary briefs executives actually wanted to read. But as we moved through deal after deal, my managers noticed something else. "You see patterns," my director told me once, dropping a file on my desk. "You catch things others miss. I need you in the room, not just outside it." So I sat in on more meetings. I listened. I asked questions. I spotted red flags buried in fine print, misaligned incentives and proposals, culture clashes that would have turned million-dollar dreams into lawsuits. Quietly, steadily, my input started to matter. By the time the summit rolled around, I was leading the internal tracking for a slate of potential acquisitions and strategic partnerships. One of those companies had a name I recognized immediately: the firm where David worked. I'd stared at the screen for a long time when that file first landed in my queue. It wasn't his company. He wasn't a founder or a C-level executive. He was a senior project manager in one of their divisions. But the project that had put them on our radar? It was his team's flagship product. "Any conflict of interest?" my director asked when I mentioned the connection. "Do you and your brother talk shop?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No. As far as my family knows, I print name tags." He shook his head. "Still, if this gets any closer to a decision, we'll loop legal in about it. For now, I want your honest read. If the numbers stink, say so. If they're good, say so." That was the thing about my role now. It wasn't about fetching coffee. It was about saying yes or no and backing it up. As I walked the halls that morning, checking that each breakout room had the right materials, that the registration area was ready, that the signage was correct, I noticed familiar branding being set up at one of the sponsor tables. There it was, my brother's company logo printed across banners and glossy brochures. I watched as a small team arrived, wheeling in demo equipment, arranging their booth. David wasn't with them yet, but his name tag was, right there on the table. waiting. "Hey!" a voice called from behind me. I turned to see my own boss, Mark, holding a tablet. "First sessions are locked in. You ready?" "Ready," I said, straightening. He glanced over at the sponsor booth. "That's the outfit your brother's at, right?" "Yeah." "And you're okay working this summit with them here? We can swap coverage on the floor if that's weird." I thought of years of just admin, of the way David never once asked what exactly I did all day, of the jokes layered over achievements he'd never even seen. "I'm fine," I said. "The work is the work." Mark studied me for a beat, then nodded. "Good, because there's a closed-door session later this afternoon with their VP and some of ours. Your notes will be important." I swallowed. Got it. What I didn't say was that later this afternoon was exactly when David had texted to brag that he'd be at a big industry summit. "Big dogs only," he'd written. "You'd be bored. It's all strategy stuff." I hadn't replied. Now, hours later, as the lobby filled with leaders from every corner of the industry, I moved through the crowd with a clipboard in my hand and a headset in my ear. To most of them, I was just someone who could fix a scheduling glitch or answer a logistical question. To a few of them, I was the person they wanted in every acquisitions meeting because I remembered what others forgot. And to my family, I was still the girl who arranges chairs. They were about to find out how wrong they were. By mid-morning, the summit was in full swing. On stage, a high-profile CEO was talking about invisible labor, the work no one notices until it stops happening. The crowd laughed when she joked about calendars mysteriously managing themselves, expenses magically getting filed. I didn't laugh. I watched the audience. Some people nudged their assistants, grinning knowingly. A few executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The ones who got it glanced toward the back of the room, where staff like me stood, always ready, always on call. In any company," the speaker said, "you can tell who truly understands leadership by how they treat the people who make their life easier." My eyes found my brother. David had arrived late, of course, sliding into the row his company had reserved, lanyard swinging, smile already turned up to max. He whispered something to the colleague next to him, both of them smirking. From where I stood, it looked like the joke was about the staff. During the coffee break, the lobby turned into a maze of conversations. Laughter bounced off the high ceilings. Business cards traded hands. People clustered around tall tables, balancing cups and pastries and egos. I was checking in with the AV team when I heard my name. "Kira!" I turned to see Susan, my sister-in-law, weaving through the crowd. "Hey," I said, surprised. "You made it?" "Of course I did." She smiled, slightly out of breath. "David wouldn't stop talking about how important this summit is. Plus, I wanted to see you in your natural habitat." She looked around, eyes wide. "This is huge. You helped put all this together?" "Me and a lot of other people," I said, keeping my voice neutral. She gave me a look. "I've seen your color-coded spreadsheets, remember? I'm pretty sure you are a lot of other people." That made me laugh, though there was a pinch in it. We chatted for a few minutes, safe topics, how she was doing, whether our parents were still arguing about the Christmas menu in March, until David appeared at her side, draping an arm over her shoulders. "There you are," he said to her, before glancing at me. "Hey, little sis, busy running the printer?" The old script, delivered effortlessly. "Something like that," I replied. He didn't notice the way Susan's eyes flickered between us. As more people from his company joined, David turned on his performance mode. He introduced Susan to everyone, bragged about a recent project, threw around buzzwords he liked the sound of. At some point, someone asked, "Wait, is that your sister? Didn't you say she worked here?" "Yeah," David said, grinning. "She's one of the admin people. You know, the ones who make sure there's coffee and chairs and name tags. She loves it." The group laughed. It wasn't cruel exactly. It was just lazy. An easy joke at someone else's expense. I felt the familiar burn in my throat. The urge to shrink. To disappear behind a pillar and go check on the next breakout room instead of standing here absorbing impact. But, Over the speaker system, the announcer's voice floated out. Our next session will begin in 10 minutes. Please make your way to the main hall. I remembered what the morning speaker had said about invisible labor, about leadership. I also remembered the first time I opened the internal file on David's company and saw the risk assessment notes. I'd flagged concerns, not about him. Our reports didn't get that granular, but about patterns in the team's delivery. Missed deadlines, overpromises. Dependence on one project manager whose name kept popping up. His name. "Hey, Kira," one of David's colleagues asked me now. "Do you get to sit in any of the big kid meetings today, or is it mostly logistics for you?" The old me would have laughed it off, made myself smaller, said something like, "Oh no, I'm just here to keep things moving." Instead, I smiled faintly. "Depends what you mean by big kid." Susan watched me closely. There was a crease between her brows, like she was working on a puzzle. "Anyway," David cut in, clapping his hands, "we should let her get back to her admin magic. If we talk to her too long, the pens might stop refilling themselves." Another round of chuckles. I felt something inside me shift. All the late nights. All the times I'd stayed in the office after everyone left. Not because I was forced to, but because I wanted to understand the deals we were making. All the times my director had asked for my opinion and actually listened. And all the times my own brother hadn't cared enough to ask even once. "What exactly do you do there now?" Maybe I'd been protecting myself by staying vague. "I work in operations. I help with events." It's complicated. Safe answers that gave him room to fill in the blanks with whatever made him comfortable. Maybe it was time to make him uncomfortable. The call for the next session echoed again. People started drifting toward the main hall. David and his group lingered at their high table, finishing their coffees. Susan stayed quiet, her gaze bouncing between David's smirk and my expression. "Come on," David told her, nudging her elbow. "We should grab seats near the front. Gotta look important, right?" She didn't move. Instead, she turned to me. "Kira," she said slowly, "I've been meaning to ask you something." The lobby noise seemed to dim around us, like someone was slowly turning down the volume. "You've been different lately," she went on, "more confident, and your emails about this summit sounded like you were running a lot more than coffee orders. So, what is it you actually do here?" The question landed between us like a challenge and a lifeline all at once. David laughed. "Babe, I told you, she's admin. She loves that stuff. Schedules, emails, all that behind-the-scenes magic." "Right, Kira?" For once, I didn't look at him when I answered. I looked at Susan, at the colleagues standing around us, at the badges hanging from their necks, each one a story of how they wanted to be seen. And then I thought of my own badge, the tiny printed title no one in my family had ever bothered to read properly. The one that contained the word I'd worked years to earn. The circle around us tightened, just enough that I could feel the edge of everyone's focus press against my skin. "So," Susan repeated, softer now, but more intent, "what do you actually do?" She didn't say it unkindly. That was the worst part. There was no mockery in her voice, only curiosity, and maybe a hint of apology for going against the easy version of the story David liked to tell. I could have let him answer for me again. I could have laughed, rolled my eyes, played the role of the long-suffering little sister who just keeps things running. Instead, I placed my coffee cup down on the table and let myself straighten fully, like I was finally standing in my own job description. "I work in acquisitions," I said. One word. It landed with a weight I felt in my bones. The chatter around us didn't just quiet. It stopped. A conversation at the next table trailed off mid-sentence. Someone dropped a stir stick, the tiny clatter absurdly loud in the sudden hush. "Acquisitions?" one of David's colleagues echoed, frowning slightly. I nodded. "Administrative operations and acquisitions. I help evaluate which companies we partner with, invest in, or don't." The last word hung in the air, sharp but calm. Across from me, Susan's face drained of color, Her eyes flicked from my face to the logo on my badge, then to the discreet symbol on her own lanyard that marked her as a guest of David's company. I watched the realization dawn in real time. "You mean," she started, voice catching. "Your team is the one that reviews proposals, due diligence packages, risk profiles," I finished gently. "Yes, I didn't say, and right now, your husband's company is on that list." I didn't have to. One of David's colleagues shifted uncomfortably. "So you're, like, part of the group deciding whether to move forward with us?" "I'm part of the group that makes recommendations," I clarified. "Final decisions are above my pay grade, but my analysis matters." Silence again, this time heavier. I could feel David staring at me, but I kept my gaze on Susan a moment longer. She looked stunned, like someone had handed her a puzzle she thought she'd already solved, only to reveal there were hidden pieces all along. "You never said that," she whispered. "No one ever asked," I replied. Finally, I turned to my brother. For the first time in years, he didn't have a smirk ready. His mouth was partly open, as if the joke he'd been about to make had died halfway out. "Wait," he said slowly. "You're telling me you're one of the people deciding if my company gets bought?" "I'm one of the people deciding whether your company even makes it past the serious consideration stage," I said. My tone wasn't cruel, it was simply factual. "I've been tracking your delivery timelines and contract compliance for the last 3 months." His face flushed a deep, blotchy red. "You're kidding," he said. Come on, you're—" He stopped himself just in time. I saw the word flash behind his eyes anyway. "Just admin." Only now the room knew better. One of his coworkers cleared his throat. "We've, been hoping for positive feedback from your side," he admitted, his voice tentative. "Leadership's pretty anxious about this deal." I tilted my head, letting that sink in. "I've given honest feedback," I said. "That's my job." Susan swallowed hard. "Honest? As in, I don't let family relationships affect my assessment," I replied. "Your company's performance is what it is." That was when David finally understood exactly where he stood. Not as the forever golden child whose mistakes would be quietly cleaned up by his little sister, but as a name in a spreadsheet, a line in a report, subject to the same scrutiny as everyone else. He looked around the circle, desperate for someone to laugh, to break the tension, to restore the hierarchy where his title made him matter more than mine. No one did. The joke wasn't funny anymore. The speaker system chimed, announcing that the next session was starting. People began to stir, but no one in our little cluster moved. Susan's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "David," she said quietly, "maybe we should sit down." He didn't respond. His eyes were still locked on me, a storm of anger, shock, and something else swirling behind them. Something that looked an awful lot like fear. Because in that moment, he finally realized who I was. Not the kid sister fetching his forgotten homework, not the family's default party planner, not the punchline to his just admin jokes. I was part of the machine that would decide whether the project he'd built his reputation on lived or died. And for the first time in our lives, he had no control over what I would say next. The rest of the coffee break moved in a blur. People began drifting toward the main hall, but the air around our little circle was still frozen. Susan finally touched David's arm. "We're going to be late," she murmured. "Come on." He blinked, like the world had suddenly come back into focus. "Yeah," he muttered. "Right." They walked away with his coworkers, but every few steps he glanced back at me, as if the last 10 minutes had rearranged the entire map in his head. In a way, they had. I didn't chase him. I didn't apologize. I picked up my clipboard and moved on to the next thing that needed to be done, because that's what I've always done. Only this time, the next thing wasn't refilling pens or checking microphones. It was a meeting that could change the trajectory of his career. By early afternoon, the summit had splintered into different tracks: breakout sessions, roundtables, a panel about AI ethics, another about restructuring in uncertain markets. Between them all, a handful of conference rooms on the top floor had been reserved for something not listed on the public agenda. Ready? Mark asked me quietly as we walked toward one of those doors. My heart was beating hard, but my voice stayed steady. Yes. Inside, the room was all glass and sharp edges, the kind of space designed to make you aware of the money being moved when people sat down. A few of our executives were already there. A legal counsel, someone from finance. The VP from David's company sat on the other side of the table, along with their head of product. David wasn't in the room, this wasn't his level. But his name was printed on one of the documents lying in front of me. "Thanks for joining us," our VP said as we all settled. He nodded in my direction. "Kira, you've been handling the internal coordination on this, right? Why don't you walk us through your latest summary before we hear their pitch?" There it was, the moment. You'd think it would feel like holding someone's life in my hands. It didn't. It felt like holding a file, a set of facts and patterns, a story told in numbers and behavior instead of words. I took a breath. Sure. I didn't start with my brother's name. I started with delivery timelines, performance metrics, incident reports. I talked about how their product had potential, how some of their team's innovations were genuinely impressive, but how those strengths were undercut by repeated execution issues. Several deadlines were missed, I said, scrolling through my tablet. Not just once, but as a pattern. There were also internal flag reports about a culture of overpromising and pushing staff to patch problems last minute instead of addressing root causes. One of our legal counsels nodded. I saw that. They stretched their people thin. The VP from David's company shifted in his seat. "We've addressed those concerns," he said quickly. "We've made changes since those reports." I didn't look at him when I answered. I looked at my notes. "There are documented improvements in the last quarter," I acknowledged. "But they seem tied to pressure around this potential deal rather than systemic change. My concern is sustainability once the spotlight is gone." If David had been in the room, he might have accused me of twisting the knife. But the truth was, I'd written all of this before I ever realized his name was attached to the project. "Based on the data we've reviewed," I continued, "my recommendation is that if we move forward, it should be with strict conditions and a phased structure. Alternatively," I hesitated, then decided I wasn't here to be gentle. "We may want to reconsider whether this is the right fit at all given the number of red flags." The room went quiet for a moment. Our VP glanced at finance, then at legal, then back to me. "Is that still your view after meeting their team in person today?" he asked. My mind flickered back to the lobby, to David's voice, loud and easy, dismissing the work that had built the very summit he was so proud to attend. "She's just admin." I thought of the speaker that morning, talking about invisible labor, about leadership. "Yes," I said simply, "it is." The VP from David's company cleared his throat. "With respect, I'm not sure your operations coordinator has a full understanding of the strategic vision here." Our VP's expression didn't change, but something cold entered his tone. "With respect," he replied, "we don't put anyone in this room unless their understanding is both deep and trusted. Kira has been one of the most reliable voices on our last 3 deals." Heat rose to my cheeks, but I kept my face neutral. "We're not here to attack you," our VP went on. "We're here to see if there's something that works for both sides, but we won't ignore consistent patterns just because a product looks good on a slide." The rest of the meeting was tense but professional. They made their pitch. We asked questions. No voices were raised. No threats were made. We left with notes and next steps. Not blood on the floor. Still, as we filed out, I knew something had shifted. Not just for them, but for me. Mark caught my eye in the hallway. "You were solid in there," he said. "No bias. Clear. That's exactly what we need from you." "Thanks," I said quietly. "Can you send me your final written recommendation tonight?" he asked. "We'll be meeting again next week to make a provisional call." I nodded. "I'll have it on your desk." As he walked away, I felt my phone buzz. A text from David. "We need to talk. Now." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I headed to the one place at the summit where I knew no one would bother us. The small outdoor terrace on the third floor, just off a side hallway. He was already there when I stepped outside, pacing a little, hands shoved into his pockets. The city skyline glittered behind him, all glass and concrete and sky. "So it's true," he said as soon as he saw me. No greeting, no smile, just accusation. "You're one of the people trying to screw us." I shut the door gently behind me. "No," I said. "I'm one of the people trying not to screw us. You just told a room full of suits that my company isn't good enough." He snapped. "You could have said something last week. You could have told me. You could have warned me." I felt my own anger stir, slow and deep. "Warned you about what exactly? That your company has a documented history of cutting corners and pushing people past their limits? You already knew that. You're in the middle of it." His jaw clenched. "This is my career, Kira. And this is my job?" I replied. "I don't get to fudge reports because my brother's involved." He laughed bitterly. "You always were the good little rule follower, huh? So perfect, so ethical. Until it hurts me." I stared at him. "You stood in front of your coworkers and your wife and told them I print name tags for a living." "That was a joke," he said, throwing his hands up. "You know I don't mean it like that." "How do you mean it then?" I asked softly. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounded like exactly what you've believed about me since we were teenagers." He rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on. You're really going to drag childhood into this? You're mad I called you just admin?" "I'm mad," I said, my voice suddenly sharp, "that you never once asked who I actually am." We stood there, the wind tugging at our clothes, the noise of the city a distant hum. "You could fix this," he said finally, his tone shifting from anger to something more slippery. "You could reword your report. Emphasize the positives. Downplay the rest. Make it clear we're worth the risk." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't have to lie. Just lean." There it was. The quiet ask. The expectation that I would bend my spine for him the way I always had. "Do you remember the first time you called me just admin?" I asked him, instead of answering. "At that dinner in college, in front of your friends." He frowned. "Why are you bringing that up?" "That was forever ago. It was the first time I realized you didn't see what I did as real work," I said. "Since then, every time you've said it, it's been a reminder that as long as I stay small, you feel big." He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "This deal," I continued, "is not about you and me. It's about whether your company is a good match for ours. The facts say it's risky. My job is to say that out loud." "So that's it?" he demanded. "You're willing to tank my career over a grudge?" The word hit me like a slap. For a moment, I almost doubted myself. But then I thought of the assistants on his team whose names I'd seen in internal reports, burning out under impossible deadlines. Of the late-night emails my inbox had caught, time-stamped at 2 a.m., from staff begging for another extension because leadership had overpromised again. "This isn't a grudge, David," I said quietly. "This is accountability." His eyes flashed. "If this deal falls through, I could lose my position." "I know," I said. "Maybe you should have thought about that before building your castle on a foundation of chaos." He took a step back, like I'd pushed him. "You really want to do this?" "I don't want any of this," I replied, and for the first time, my voice cracked. I wanted a brother who saw me. I wanted a family who didn't treat my work like a punchline. I wanted you to be proud of me, not only when I made your life easier. I took a breath. "But I'm done making myself smaller so you can feel taller. If your company can't stand on its own merits, it's not my job to prop it up." His expression hardened into something I didn't recognize. "Don't come crying to me when this blows back on you," he said. "Mom and Dad will lose it when they find out what you did." "If they'd been paying attention," I said, "they would already know what I do." He laughed once, humorless. "Enjoy your little power trip, Kira." Then he yanked the door open and disappeared back inside, leaving me alone on the terrace with only the wind and the knowledge that, for the first time in our lives, I'd chosen myself over him. That night, in my small apartment, I sat at my desk and wrote my final recommendation. I didn't add any venom. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't soften the edges either. I laid out the facts. At the end of the document, I added a single sentence. Given the persistent patterns of behavior documented above, I recommend we do not move forward with an acquisition at this time. I signed my name, and I hit send. The decision came 3 weeks later. By then, the summit felt like a dream I'd had in another life. I'd gone back to my routines, morning coffee, train to the office, meetings, spreadsheets, calls. But under all of it, there was a low, constant hum of waiting. When the email finally arrived from leadership, my heart stuttered. Subject: Final Decision, Meridian Systems Proposal, David's Company. I read the first line once, then twice. After careful consideration and review of all materials and recommendations, we've decided not to move forward with the proposed acquisition of Meridian Systems at this time. I exhaled slowly, the air leaving my lungs in a way that felt like it had been building for years. It was done. Not just because of me. Our team's concerns had been echoed by finance, by legal, by outside consultants. But my report had been one of the anchors. For a moment, guilt flashed through me like lightning. Then I remembered the terrace, the way he'd leaned on me, assuming I would bend. My phone buzzed before I'd fully processed the message. First, a text from Susan. "Did you hear about the deal?" Then, seconds later, a call from my mother. I stared at the screen. For the first time in a long time, I let it ring out. Then I listened to the voicemail. "Kira," Mom's voice trembled. "Your brother is devastated. He says your company pulled out of the agreement. Can you call me back? We need to understand what happened. He's saying this has your fingerprints on it." Of course he was. I sat there for a long time, phone in my hand, the weight of all the years pressing down on me. All the dinners where my achievements had been skipped over. All the jokes about my little office job. All the extra labor I'd done for free, just to be included. Was I the villain now? The cold-hearted sister who let his deal die? Or was I just the first person in our family who refused to clean up after him anymore? That evening, I finally answered one of Mom's calls. "How could you do this?" were the first words out of her mouth. "Hi, Mom," I said, not unkindly. "Nice to hear from you, too." "This isn't the time for jokes," she snapped. "Your brother worked so hard on this. He said you gave a bad report about his company, that you made them look incompetent." "I gave an honest report," I corrected. "Based on documented issues, not personal feelings." "You know how important this was for him," she pressed. "You could have helped. Just this once." I laughed softly, unable to help myself. "Just this once? Mom, I've been helping my whole life. That's literally the role you assigned me." "This is different," she insisted. "This affects his future. So does it affect mine," I said. "If I start lying in official reports because my brother doesn't like how the truth sounds, that affects my future too." There was a beat of silence. "You've changed," she said finally, as if it were an accusation. "You used to be so accommodating." "Yes," I said. "I know." "Your brother is in pieces," she went on. "He says all his work might be wasted now. His bosses are furious." "That's between him and his bosses," I replied. "Not him and me. Families should protect each other," she tried again, her voice wobbling. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice even. "Families should respect each other," I said. "For years you watched David tear me down in front of people and never said a word." "That was just teasing," she protested weakly. "Maybe to you," I said. "To me, it was a reminder that no matter what I did, I would always be second class in this family." She inhaled sharply. "That's not fair, isn't it?" I asked. "When was the last time you asked me what I actually do at my job?" Silence stretched between us. "Exactly," I said quietly. "I don't want to argue," she whispered. I don't want to lose my children over a business deal." "You're not losing me," I said. I'm just not willing to sacrifice my integrity to protect the version of David you prefer to see. She sniffed. He says you humiliated him at that conference. I thought of the lobby, of his joke, of the moment the room went quiet after my one word. I told the truth, I said. In a room where he'd been telling a lie about me for years. That's not how he sees it. I know, I replied. And maybe he never will. After we hung up, I sat on my couch in the dim light of my living room, the glow from the TV flickering silently. My phone buzzed again and again. Texts from cousins, from relatives who'd never once asked how my day was going but now wanted an explanation. I didn't answer them. Instead, I opened another message, from Susan. I'm so sorry about all of this. I heard what your mother said to you. Can we talk? We met a few days later at a small cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. She looked exhausted. There were faint shadows under her eyes. How are you? She asked as soon as we sat down. That depends on who you ask, I said dryly. According to Mom, I'm the reason David's world is falling apart. A tiny smile tugged at her mouth. According to David, too. And according to you? I asked. She stirred her coffee slowly. According to me, you did your job. And he's finally dealing with consequences he's been dodging for a long time. I blinked. That's not what I expected to hear. She gave a small, sad laugh. You think you're the only one who's been on the receiving end of his ego? She told me things I'd never heard before, about the way David talked about his own team, how he took credit for their work, how he dismissed suggestions from junior staff, about late nights where he vented about idiots in operations who didn't understand vision. He never connected that you're one of those operations people now, she said. In his mind, you froze at 22. How's he handling the decision? I asked. Badly, she sighed. They didn't fire him, but the deal falling through made his bosses reevaluate a lot of things. They've pulled him off the flagship project. He's not taking it well. Part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction. Another part felt a dull ache. We'd shared a childhood, Christmas mornings, inside jokes that existed long before just admin became his favorite phrase. I don't want him ruined, I said quietly. I just want him to stop stepping on me to reach higher. That's not on you, she replied. That's on him. She hesitated, then reached across the table and squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, she added, when you said acquisitions in that lobby, I felt something crack. Not because you embarrassed him, but because I realized how fast I'd bought his version of you. I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner. My throat tightened. Thank you, I managed. We talked for a while longer. About work, about therapy, about the strange grief that comes with realizing your family may never see you clearly, no matter how brightly you learn to stand. Before we parted, she looked at me seriously. Whatever happens between me and David, she said, I want you to know this. You didn't do anything wrong. You drew a boundary. That's allowed. Boundary. It was such a simple word for something that had felt impossible my whole life. Over the next few months, contact with my family thinned. They still had their group chats, their Sunday dinners, their photos, without me. Occasionally, Mom would send a message. We miss you. When will you let this go? She never asked, what do you need from us to come back? So I built my own life. I poured myself into work, not as an escape, but as a way to keep growing. I joined a mentorship program for young admins, teaching them how to turn invisible work into visible leverage. I started saying no to unreasonable requests instead of automatically fixing everything. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about that day in the lobby, about the hush that fell after I said one word, about the look on David's face when he realized I held a kind of power he couldn't control, not because I'd stolen it, but because I'd earned it. Did it fix everything? No. We haven't magically reconciled. There's no tearful family dinner where everyone suddenly apologizes and understands me. Real life rarely gives you that kind of neat ending. But there is this. The next time someone at a party asked what I did for a living and a relative tried to jump in with, "She's our organized one, she keeps everyone in line," I smiled and answered for myself. "I work in acquisitions," I said. "I evaluate which companies make sense for us to partner with and which ones don't. It's a lot of responsibility. I love it." And this time, when the room went quiet, it wasn't because they were shocked I had power over my brother. It was because they finally realized I'd had power all along. So here's my question to you. If you've stayed with me this far, have you ever let someone else's version of you become louder than your own? And if you have, what would happen if, just once, you told your story in your own words instead? Maybe it won't make a conference room go silent, but it might be enough to make your world finally listen.